want my story to affect harm to anybody. So, I mean, I had to learn this the hard way, kind of not just because of the chocolate chip thing earlier, but, you know, when I share about painful experiences, is this helpful? You know, is this helping the audience? How would it be helpful if I wasn't going to share all the details? How would this, you know, do I need to put a trigger warning in a book or in a work, like if I'm in a workshop where we're really going deep on something, you know, very specific, then, you know, I might employ my mental health first aid skills and say, hey, if this is triggering, feel free to, you know, do what you need to do. But when we have a captive audience in person versus a book where somebody can set it down and take a break, like being aware of your audience's needs is really important. But yeah, I think having that awareness for yourself of like, do I need to write this story, a version of this for myself, for the comfort level of even just like, it's kind of like sonar, like we need to send out like to ourselves, like, where are the boundaries here? Where are the limits so that I can kind of get a feel of where I'm comfortable, and maybe writing it and then sharing it with a friend, somebody you trust before submitting it to a publisher or putting it online. Some people, a lot of authors I know, will use a pen name online to test material. And there's plenty of writers forums where people could do that. I mean, yeah, you could absolutely have that stolen, but most people aren't really stealing other people's content. It's just, that might be one way to play with different ways of presenting your story. If you're like, I'm not really sure, and people will poke holes in it if you ask them to. Sometimes they'll poke holes without you asking. They're called trolls. So it's like really, it can be fun. Even on the tender topics of like, I'm not really sure, but have you ever watched the movie Atonement? There's like Keira Knightley, and so it's a story of this little girl. She grows up and she becomes this really prolific author, and she ends up writing her last book before she passes is like a rewrite of a real life experience because of a bad choice that she made as a kid, just not knowing. And what I love about that is that might be another way to share a story, is a different version of what you lived had you known better or known differently what you know now. And even if it's like I think about books like The Greatest Salesman in the World, and they use a parable, you know, they're not even using a real story, but a parable can be just as powerful as a real life story. And it can be easier for a reader to not just digest that second person account, but for them to discover these principles on their own through the lens of that protagonist, instead of you just saying, this is what I learned, now be triggered and go away, or learn the lessons or whatever. You could take them through a story where they're like, they should do this, where they wouldn't have thought about it in that way had you not shared the story. But you might have to write it for yourself first in that first person account, just to get all of it out of your head and go, okay, here it is. Now, from what lens is the safest? What lens feels good for me, but is most effective for the reader? And you can have lots of versions of the same story and get a great result. So whether you want to go deep or not for your own experience, or if you want to protect people in your life from having to even have the choice of, am I comfortable sharing this or having somebody else share this? There are plenty of examples in my own life, in my books. I'm writing a person I know, or the opposite of that person, because that's the story. That's like, but I'm not going to say, oh, that's this person. You'd have to really look hard to figure that out. And I thank my editors for their guidance on that. That's not something I came up with on my own. They're like, how about we do something totally different so that you don't ever have to worry about that? And it's kind of fun. It's kind of like, oh, now I can kind of create, I can go from a creative place instead of hiding, or let me put some layers of extra stuff on there because people can see right through that anyway.